On the early American scene, the ancestry of the prophet Joseph Smith were among those who made a distinctive contribution to the growth and development of this great land. Solomon Mack, the maternal grandfather of Joseph, enlisted during the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1759, and was active in the campaign centering in the areas of Lake George and Lake Champlain. Aciel Smith was enrolled in a regiment called to defend New York's northern frontier. In expressing his great loyalty to country and Constitution, Aciel later addressed his family.
Bless God that you live in a land of liberty and bear yourself dutifully and conscionable toward the authority under which you live. See God's providence in the appointment of the federal Constitution and hold union and order as a precious jewel.
Solomon Mack lived for a number of years in the town of his birth, Lyme, Connecticut. There he married Lydia Gates of East Haddam in 1759. The couple eventually moved to Gilsum, New Hampshire, where a daughter, Lucy, the last of 8 children, was born on July 8th of 1775. Aciel Smith, a native of Topsfield, Massachusetts, was married to Mary Duty of Windham, New Hampshire on February 12, 1767. While living at Topsfield, their son Joseph was born July 12, 1771. He was the third of 11 children and later to become the father of the prophet Joseph Smith, Jr. Having rented land in Ipswich, Massachusetts, Aciel moved his family to that location from Topsfield in 1791. However, with a purchase of 83 acres in the Tunbridge Gore, Tunbridge, Vermont, the family found still another move necessary in the fall of that same year. It was while residing in the town of Tunbridge that Joseph Smith met Lucy Mack, daughter of Solomon. Lucy had come to visit her brother, Stephen, in an effort to relieve the great sadness she was experiencing following the death of a sister, Lovina. Stephen Mack and John Mudgett owned a mercantile store, a mill, and other holdings in and about the village of Tunbridge. Joseph, who lived southwest of the village, began to court the favor of Lucy. This acquaintanceship blossomed into romance, and they were married on January 24th, 1796. Stephen Mack and his business partner blessed their union with a wedding gift or dowry of $1,000. According to Brigham Young, this was a marriage made in heaven, one through which a great prophet would be born. Speaking of the prophet Joseph Smith, Jr., and the ancestral line through which he would come, President Young stated,
"It was decreed in the councils of eternity, long before the foundations of the earth were laid, that he, Joseph Smith, should be the man in the last dispensation of this world to bring forth the word of God to the people and receive the fullness of the keys and power of the priesthood of the Son of God. The Lord had his eyes upon him, and upon his father, and upon his father's father, and upon their progenitors clear back to Abraham, and from Abraham to the flood, and from the flood to Enoch, and from Enoch to Adam. He has watched that family and that blood as it has circulated from its fountain to the birth of that man. He was foreordained in eternity to preside over this last dispensation."
Joseph and Lucy Smith made their home on the Tunbridge farm for 6 years, 1796 to 1802. 2 children were born to the Smiths in this period: Alvin, February 11, 1798, and Hiram, February 1st, 1800. In 1802, Joseph and Lucy rented their farm and moved to the town of Randolph, Orange County, Vermont, where they entered the mercantile business. While engaged at the store, Joseph found that the crystallization and sale of ginseng root held every prospect of bringing an excellent financial reward. That product had a high market value in China, where it was used for its supposed medicinal qualities. Lucy Smith described her husband's involvement with the ginseng trade in the following terms.
He therefore concluded to embark in the traffic of this article, and consequently made an investment of all the means which he commanded, in that way and manner which was necessary to carry on a business of this kind, that is, crystallizing and exporting the root. When he had obtained a quantity of the same, a merchant by the name of Stevens, of Royalton, offered him $3,000 for what he had. But my husband refused his offer, as it was only about 2/3 of its real value, and told the gentleman that he would rather venture shipping it himself.
Joseph Smith Sr. did go to New York City, and there put his cargo of ginseng root on a vessel. However, Mr. Stevens followed Joseph and put not only his own ginseng shipment on the same ship, but also his son, young Stevens. In some way, this young man took charge of both his father's ginseng and that of Joseph Smith. In China, the root sold for an excellent price. Upon his return, young Stevens lied to Joseph about the success of the voyage, saying that the sale had been a perfect failure, and the only thing which had been brought for Mr. Smith from China was a small chest of tea. The truth was discovered, however, by Stephen Mack, who called on young Stevens and found him in a drunken condition. Being under the influence of liquor, Stevens was not on his guard and revealed everything. Stephen Mack was taken to a trunk, the lid opened, and Stevens remarked,
"There, sir, are the proceeds of Mr. Smith's ginseng."
A large amount of silver and gold was exhibited. Stephen Mack reported his discovery to Joseph Smith Sr., who immediately went in search of Stevens. But the young man had had time to recover his senses and to flee into Canada with the cash. Joseph pursued him for a period, but was not able to overtake him. Father Smith had invested heavily in the China venture. His accounts indicated that he owed $1,800 to Boston merchants. In order to satisfy this obligation, Lucy's $1,000 dowry was sacrificed and Joseph's interest in the Tunbridge farm was sold for $800. The Smiths paid their debts but were now penniless. The sale of the farm caused Joseph and Lucy to move to the town of Royalton, Windsor County, Vermont. They were there only a few months when they again moved to Sharon, Windsor County. In that township, they rented a portion of a 100-acre farm belonging to Lucy's father, Solomon Mack, who had just arrived from Gilsum, New Hampshire in 1804. Joseph and his family made their home in a log cabin located on Derry Hill. It was in this dwelling that the prophet Joseph Smith was born, December 23, 1805.
In 1905, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Joseph's birth, the LDS Church purchased the site where the log cabin had stood, and under the supervision of Junius F. Wells, erected a beautiful 38.5-foot granite shaft, each foot representing 1 year of the prophet's life. A memorial cottage, since replaced by a new visitors' bureau, was also constructed on that spot. Today, only the hearthstone and front doorstep remain from the original cabin in which Joseph Smith first saw the light of day.
While living at Sharon, Father Smith kept his family by farming in the summer and teaching school in the winter. The Smiths stayed at Sharon for approximately 3 years and then undertook a new series of moves. Lucy Mack Smith reported,
We moved thence to Tunbridge. Here we had another son, whom we named Samuel Harrison, born March 13, 1808. We lived in this place a short time and then moved to Royalton, where Ephraim was born, March 13, 1810. He died March 24, 1810. We continued here until we had another son, born March 13, 1811, whom we called William. In 1811, we moved from Royalton, Vermont, to the town of Lebanon, New Hampshire.
Unfortunately, all of the children contracted typhus fever during an epidemic which killed hundreds of persons in New Hampshire and Vermont. First Sophronia, next Hiram, then Alvin. Finally, Joseph became seriously ill. Each in his turn recovered except Joseph Jr., who was troubled with side effects. Joseph was afflicted in his left leg and ankle. An infectious fever sore developed, accompanied by swelling and severe pain. The prophet later described just how dangerous his physical condition had become.
Whoa! Whoa up there!
At one time, 11 doctors came from Dartmouth Medical College at Hanover, New Hampshire, for the purpose of amputation. But young as I was, I utterly refused to give my assent to the operation, but consented to their trying an experiment by removing a large portion of the bone from my left leg, which they did, and 14 additional pieces of bone afterwards worked out before my leg healed, during which time I was reduced so very low that my mother could carry me with ease.
As there was no anesthetic to put Joseph to sleep, the doctors offered him strong drink to dull his senses and ease the shock of the operation. However, Joseph refused, saying,
I will not touch one particle of liquor, neither will I be tied down. But I will tell you what I will do. I will have my father sit on my bed and hold me in his arms, and then I will do whatever is necessary.
The leg operation was so successful that in later years the prophet was in no way hindered from competing in his favorite sports of jumping at the mark, pulling sticks, or wrestling. Almost a year of illness had reduced the Smith family to a low state. Joseph and Lucy again thought to better their condition by a move to the town of Norwich, Windsor County, Vermont. There they rented a farm belonging to one Esquire Murdoch. However, their fortune did not change. 3 years in a row, they experienced crop failures. During this last crop failure, Vermont suffered what has been called the cold season of 1816, or 1800 and froze to death. On the 8th of June, several inches of snow fell, ice formed on the ponds, and leaves froze on the trees. The crops throughout the state were almost completely ruined. Whether it was this snow in June or one of the earlier killing frosts which created Father Smith's determination to go in search of a better situation is as yet unclear. At some point, undoubtedly a time following the birth of a new son, Don Carlos Smith, born at Norwich, Vermont, March 25, 1816, and after the destruction of the partially matured crops by the cold, Joseph Smith Sr. and a Mr. Caleb Howard traveled to Palmyra, New York. There, they found the circumstances favorable, and Mr. Howard was sent to bring back the entire Smith family. With what belongings they could load on a wagon, the long, difficult trek was begun. Joseph Jr. has described that journey and an unfortunate accident which eventually took the life of his grandmother, Lydia Mack.
Although the snow was generally deep through the country during this journey, we performed the whole on wheels, except the first 2 days when we were accompanied by my mother's mother, Grandmother Lydia Mack, who was injured by the upsetting of the sleigh, and not wishing to accompany her friends west, tarried by the way with her friends in Vermont. And we soon after heard of her death, supposing that she never recovered from the injury received by the overturn of the sleigh.
Caleb Howard, the man sent to safely conduct Mother Smith and her children to Palmyra, turned out to be a scoundrel. He spent the money which he had received from Joseph Smith Sr. in drinking and gambling. Howard would not let young Joseph, still limping from his bout with typhus fever, ride in the wagon, but forced him to walk behind. When Joseph's brothers got after Caleb for this ill treatment, he knocked them down with the butt of his whip. At Utica, New York, Mr. Howard threw the goods belonging to the Smiths out of the wagon into the street and attempted to steal the team and wagon. However, Lucy Mack Smith seized the horses by the reins and calling witnesses forbade his taking their property. Caleb Howard was only too happy to leave this brave woman's belongings and beat a hasty retreat. Still, their problems were not entirely over. The Smiths were traveling to western New York with a Mr. Gates and his family. That association cost young Joseph a very painful experience. He recorded.
On our way from Utica, I was left to ride on the last sleigh in the company. The Gates family were in sleighs. But when that came up, I was knocked down by the driver, one of the Gates sons, and left to wallow in my blood until a stranger came along, picked me up, and carried me to the town of Palmyra.
When the family finally arrived at Palmyra, they were without funds and in very difficult
Joseph,
circumstances.
how are you? Oh, you look
However,
well.
Mother Smith expressed the more important aspect of their reunion with Joseph Smith Sr. when she said,
Notwithstanding our misfortunes and the embarrassments with which we were surrounded, I was quite happy in once more having the society of my husband and in throwing myself and children upon the care and affection of a tender companion and father.
Following their arrival from Vermont, tradition states that the Smiths located in a house on the southeast corner of the intersection between Johnson and Vienna Streets in the village of Palmyra. However, after 2 years in 1818, the family contracted for 100 acres of land in what was then called the town or township of Farmington. By 1822, it had received its more familiar name of Manchester, Ontario County. That first year, through long hours of toil, a cabin was built, and about 30 acres of land were cleared for cultivation. During these early years in Manchester, the Smith family experienced a strong revivalistic movement among the churches in the neighborhood. Lucy Mack Smith stated,
There was a great revival in religion which extended to all the denominations of Christians in the surrounding country in which we resided.
Continuing, she explained,
Many of the world's people, becoming concerned about the salvation of their souls, came forward and presented themselves as seekers after religion.
Among the seekers were 4 members of the Smith family: the mother, Lucy Mack Smith, and her children, Hiram, Samuel Harrison, and Sophronia, who all joined the Presbyterian Church in Palmyra. Joseph Smith Jr., then in his 15th year, was also stirred by this religious fervor. He found that
so great were the confusion and strife among the different denominations that it was impossible for a person as young as I was, and so unacquainted with men and things, to come to any conclusion who was right and who was wrong.
His mind became so excited by all the cry and tumult that he determined to seek an answer from God in secret prayer. Stirred by his reading from James chapter 1, verse 5,
"If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God."
Joseph retired to the nearby woods on a beautiful, clear morning, early in the spring of 1820. In attempting to pray, Joseph was set upon by an unseen enemy which seized him in an attempt to restrain his petition. He called on the Lord to release him from this unholy influence. And the most remarkable and sublime response to that cry for assistance has been detailed by the prophet.
I saw a pillar of light exactly over my head, above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. It no sooner appeared than I found myself delivered from the enemy which held me bound. When the light rested upon me, I saw two personages, whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above me in the air. One of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other,
"This is my beloved Son. Hear him."
My object in going to inquire of the Lord was to know which of all the sects was right, and I might know which to join. No sooner, therefore, did I get possession of myself so as to be able to speak, than I asked the personages who stood above me in the light, which of all the sects was right, and which should I join? I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. And many other things did he say unto me, which I cannot write at this time.
Joseph had received a startling answer to his fervent prayer. His account of what had happened was accepted by his family. However, outside that circle of belief, Joseph's message was rejected.
I soon found that my telling the story had excited a great deal of prejudice against me among the professors of religion, and in a manner to create in them a spirit of the most bitter persecution and reviling.
He made a particular attempt to tell the events of his vision to one of the Methodist preachers who had been most active in the recent revivals. However, the minister treated his account of the experience with contempt, saying,
"It was all of the devil, that there were no such things as visions or revelations in these days, that all such things had ceased with the apostles, and that there would never be any more of them."
There will be no more.
Undoubtedly, during this time, Joseph was involved in a family building project. The birth of Lucy Smith on July 18, 1821 increased the family size to 11 persons. Living conditions in the little cabin were very crowded. Enjoying only a modest income, nevertheless, the Smiths made a determined effort to construct a new house. By November 1822, the frame had been raised. Alvin, the foreman on the job, said,
"I am going to have a nice, pleasant room for Father and Mother to sit in, and everything arranged for their comfort, and they shall not work any more as they have done."
Joseph stated that in the years which intervened between the first vision in 1820 and September 21st, 1823, he frequently fell into many foolish errors and displayed the weakness of youth. He remarked that he was guilty of levity and sometimes associated with jovial company. However, on the evening of September 21st, feeling somewhat condemned for these actions, he engaged in a prayer of supplication for forgiveness, with a desire to know his standing before God. The prophet has given a most interesting account of the results of that appeal.
While I was thus in the act of calling upon God, I discovered a light appearing in my room, which continued to increase until the room was lighter than at noonday, when immediately a personage appeared at my bedside, standing in the air, for his feet did not touch the floor. When I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. He called me by name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Moroni, that God had a work for me to do.
The angel then described the existence of a book written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of the American continent and containing the fullness of the everlasting gospel as given to those people by the Savior hundreds of years before. He also told Joseph of certain artifacts deposited with the plates for use in the translating of the book, a breastplate and the Urim and Thummim. The prophet was then shown in vision the place where the plates were hidden. This message, with other insights, was given to Joseph not once, but 3 times during the course of the evening. Joseph was surprised after his 3rd visit to hear the cock crow and to realize that the interviews had lasted the whole of the night. That day, Joseph attempted to perform his labors in the field with his father and brother Alvin. However, he appeared pale, and Joseph Sr. sent him back to the house. Before reaching home, he fell exhausted to the earth, and at that moment was again visited by Moroni. Moroni instructed him to tell his father everything that had happened the previous night. This was done, and Father Smith charged his son to do exactly as the angel had directed. Throughout his life, Joseph Smith Sr. believed in his son and gave him every needful support. Joseph left the field and went to the spot shown him by the angel. This location was to become more familiar as the Hill Cumorah, situated less than 3 miles southeast of the Smith home. Arriving at the site, the 18-year-old youth described his actions.
On the west side of this hill, not far from the top, under a stone of considerable size, lay the plates, deposited in a stone box. This stone was thick and rounding in the middle on the upper side and thinner towards the edges, so that the middle part of it was visible above the ground, but the edge all around was covered with earth. Having removed the earth, I obtained a lever, which I got fixed under the edge of the stone, and with a little exertion raised it up. I looked in, and there indeed did I behold the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate, as stated by the messenger.
When Joseph attempted to take the plates from their container, he was informed by Moroni that the time for their removal had not arrived. Neither would it until 4 years from that time, the prophet explained.
He told me that I should come to that place precisely in 1 year from that time, and that he would meet with me, and that I should continue to do so until the time should come for obtaining the plates.
Alvin's personal design for the comfort of his parents in a new home was stopped by his own untimely death. On November 15, 1823, he came to the house very ill. A Dr. Greenwood was called upon to assist in the absence of their regular physician, Dr. McIntyre. Dr. Greenwood administered an overdose of calomel, which lodged in his intestinal tract and caused Alvin a very painful death. Realizing that this ailment was about to take his life, Alvin called for each of the children in turn to be brought to his bedside and gave them a parting admonition. In his charge to Joseph Jr., he said,
"I want you to be a good boy and to do everything that lies in your power to obtain the record. Be faithful in receiving instruction and in keeping every commandment that is given you."
Alvin died on November 19, 1823, and his sorrowing family buried him in what is today the General John Swift Memorial Cemetery, Palmyra, New York. In accordance with his arrangement with the angel, Joseph met Moroni at the Hill Cumorah on September 22, 1824, and again on that same date in 1825. Shortly afterward, October 1825, Lucy Mack Smith reported that a man by the name of Josiah Stowell came from Shenango County, New York, with a view of getting Joseph Jr. to help him in digging for a silver mine. He hired both young Joseph Smith and his father to aid in searching for a Spanish silver mine supposedly located in the hills near the village of Harmony, Pennsylvania. After a fruitless search by a crew of men lasting into November, Joseph Jr. said that he persuaded Mr. Stowell to cease his digging efforts. While in Harmony, Joseph boarded at the home of Isaac Hale. There he met Mr. Hale's daughter, Emma. The two were immediately attracted to one another, even after Joseph left that area to work on Josiah Stowell's farm below South Bainbridge, Shenango County, New York. He continued his visits to Harmony to see her. Joseph finally requested Emma's hand in marriage. The prophet has recorded the reaction of the Hale family to his proposal.
Owing to my continuing to assert that I had seen a vision, persecution still followed me, and my wife's father's family were very much opposed to our being married. I was, therefore, under the necessity of taking her elsewhere. So we went and were married at the house of Squire Tarbill in South Bainbridge, Chenango County, New York.
The handsome pair was married by Esquire Zachariah Tarbill on January 18, 1827. Joseph then left the employment of Josiah Stowell and his part-time work with a Mr. Joseph Knight of Colesville, Broome County, New York, and went to the Smith family home in Manchester. There he farmed that season with his father. Joseph and Emma were still residing with the Smiths in September 1827 when the time for acquiring the golden plates arrived. It's interesting to note that on September 20th, 1827, Josiah Stowell and Joseph Knight Sr. came to visit Joseph in Manchester. These men had shown a great deal of interest in the prophet's activities and were anxious to assist in any way they could. On the night of September 21st, 1827, Lucy Smith said that she sat up late. She recorded the following sequence of events.
I sat up very late, as my work rather pressed upon my hands. I did not retire until after 12 o'clock. Joseph came in to me and asked me if I had a chest with a lock and key. I knew in an instant what he wanted it for, and not having one, I was greatly alarmed, as I thought it might be a matter of considerable moment. But Joseph, discovering my anxiety, said,
"Never mind. I can do very well for the present without it. Be calm. All is right."
Shortly after this, Joseph's wife passed through the room with her bonnet and riding dress, and in a few minutes they left together, taking Mr. Knight's horse and wagon. Early in the morning of September 22nd, Joseph and Emma drove to the Hill Cumorah. Emma was left with the wagon, and the prophet continued to his place of meeting with Moroni. The angel delivered the plates to Joseph with a very special charge.
That I should be responsible for them. That if I should let them go carelessly or through any neglect of mine, I should be cut off. But that if I would use all my endeavors to preserve them until he, the messenger, should call for them, they should be protected.
Today, in commemoration of this historic encounter, a unique monument measuring 30 feet from ground level marks the site. A 10-foot statue of the angel Moroni graces the granite marker. In addition to this monument, the LDS Church sponsors the annual Hill Cumorah pageant each year. The pageant usually begins during the last week in July and depicts in beautiful color and stirring drama the story of the Book of Mormon. The narrative account, as taken from the gold plates, is portrayed on the very location where the messenger delivered the record to Joseph Smith. A lovely visitors bureau with excellent guide service stands at the base of the Hill Cumorah.
Leaving the Hill Cumorah, Joseph took the plates and concealed them in what his mother stated was an old birch log. Describing the care with which her son hid the plates, she reported,
"The plates were secreted about 3 miles from home in the following manner. Finding an old birch log much decayed, excepting the bark, which was in a measure sound, he took his pocket knife and cut the bark with some care, and then turned it back and made a hole of sufficient size to receive the plates. And laying them in the cavity thus formed, he replaced the bark. After which he laid across the log in several places some old stuff that happened to lay near, in order to conceal as much as possible the place in which they were deposited."
Joseph soon learned why the angel Moroni had given him such a strict warning about the protection of the plates. The prophet said that,
"No sooner was it known that I had them, and the most strenuous exertions were used to get them from me."
In some fashion, a neighbor, Willard Chase, learned that Joseph had received the plates. Summoning other persons to his home, Chase laid careful plans to steal the record. However, his plot was fortunately overheard by Joseph Smith Sr., who happened to call on Mr. Chase just as he was rehearsing his plan with these ruffians to search the woods for the plates. Father Smith immediately informed Emma Smith of this development, and she quickly rode to warn Joseph, who had been hired to dig a well for a Mrs. Wells in nearby Macedon. Returning to Manchester, Joseph hurried to the log where the plates were concealed. he found that they were safe, but encountered difficulty on the way home. Mother Smith described what happened.
After proceeding a short distance, he thought it would be more safe to leave the road and go through the woods. Traveling some distance after he left the road, he came to a large windfall. And as he was jumping over a log, a man sprang up from behind it and gave him a heavy blow with a gun. Joseph turned around and knocked him down and then ran at the top of his speed. About a half-mile farther, he was attacked again in the same manner as before. He knocked this man down in like manner as the former and ran on again. And before he reached home, he was assaulted the third time. In striking the last one, he dislocated his thumb, which, however, he did not notice until he came within sight of the house, when he threw himself down in the corner of the fence in order to recover his breath.
Shortly after this, the plates were hidden under the hearth of the Smith home. However, they were not safe even there. The stone was scarcely relaid when a large group of men, well armed, rushed up to the house. Joseph and his family had anticipated just such a move on the part of the mob and were ready for them.
Joseph threw open the doors, and taking a hint from the stratagem of his grandfather Mac, who had attacked 4 Indians armed only with a staff in the French and Indian War, hallooed as if he had a legion at hand, in the meanwhile giving the word of command with great emphasis. And all the male portion of the family, from the father down to little Carlos, ran out of the house with such fury upon the mob that it struck them with terror and dismay, and they fled before the little Spartan band into the woods, where they dispersed themselves to their several homes.
The plates found various hiding places in this period. However, Joseph recognized that they could not remain safe for any length of time as the mob continued to search the farm and its buildings. Even the floor of the cooper's shop was torn up in an effort to get their hands on the record. Under these circumstances, Joseph had little or no time to carefully examine the plates without being interrupted. By arrangement, Alva Hale, Emma's brother, arrived from Harmony with a horse and a wagon to take Joseph and his wife to a more quiet situation in Pennsylvania. The prophet was aided in this move by some very timely assistance from a friend, Martin Harris. Martin had been told of the plates even before they were taken from the hill Cumorah, and was immediately informed when Joseph received them from the angel. Meeting Joseph at a public house in Palmyra, Martin Harris handed the prophet a bag of silver, saying,
"Here, Mr. Smith, is $50. I give this to you to do the Lord's work with. No, I give it to the Lord for his own work."
For Joseph, Emma, and Alva, this December trip to Harmony was not uneventful. The prophet put the record and the breastplate into a small box, and then that box was placed in a barrel of beans and sealed shut. The trio then attempted to get safely out of the area of Manchester before the mob spotted them. However, the wagon was stopped twice by officers, who under a pretended warrant, and incited by the mob, searched the wagon, but were unable to detect the hidden treasure. Before Joseph left Manchester, he made arrangements with Martin Harris to join him in Harmony for a specific purpose. Lucy Mack Smith said,
When Joseph had had sufficient time to accomplish the journey and transcribe some of the Egyptian characters, it was agreed that Martin Harris should follow him, and that he, Martin, should take the characters to the east. And on his way, he was to call on all the professed linguists in order to give them an opportunity to display their talents in giving a translation of the characters.
Accordingly, Martin traveled from his home in Palmyra Township to Pennsylvania, arriving at the Smith home sometime in the month of February, 1828. The transcript of characters was then taken to New York City by Martin for an evaluation by scholarly persons. The major reason for this effort, however, lies in the fulfillment of prophecy. As the angel Moroni revealed the ancient record to Joseph Smith, he explained that
the scripture must be fulfilled before it is translated, which says that the words of a book, which are sealed, were presented to the learned. For thus has God determined to leave men without excuse, and show the meek that his arm is not shortened, that it cannot save.
The scripture referred to by Moroni is found in the book of Isaiah. That ancient prophet spoke of a people who would be brought down and speak out of the ground. Isaiah then announced,
And the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. Wherefore the Lord said, For as much as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid.
Among the learned men contacted by Martin Harris was Dr. Charles Anthon of Columbia College. Martin's description of that meeting indicates a literal fulfillment of Isaiah's prophetic view hundreds of years before the event.
He gave me a certificate certifying to the people of Palmyra that they were true characters. I took their certificate and put it into my pocket and was just leaving the house when Mr. Anthon called me back and asked me how the young man found out that there were gold plates in the place where he found them. I answered that an angel of God had revealed it unto him. He then said to me, "Let me see that certificate." I accordingly took it out of my pocket and gave it to him, when he took it and tore it to pieces, saying that there was no such thing now as ministering of angels, and that if I could bring the plates to him, he would translate them. I informed him that part of the plates were sealed, and that I was forbidden to bring them. He replied, "I cannot read a sealed book."
With a deep conviction that he was engaged in the work of the Lord, Martin Harris returned to Harmony for a discussion with Joseph, then journeyed to his farm in Palmyra Township, where he arranged his affairs for an extended absence. In April, accompanied by his wife, Lucy Harris, he next traveled back to Pennsylvania, where he joined Joseph as his scribe in the translation of the plates. Lucy Harris was greatly put out with her husband's assistance to Joseph Smith. While in Harmony, she did everything within her power to disrupt the work and to turn public feeling against Joseph. Mrs. Harris was determined to get a look at the plates.
She commenced ransacking every nook and corner about the house. Chests, trunks, cupboards, etc. Consequently, Joseph was under the necessity of removing both the breastplate and the record from the house and secreting them elsewhere.
Her efforts were finally ended when Martin abruptly loaded her into a buggy, dropped her off in Palmyra, returned, and continued his writing for Joseph. From April 12, 1828, to June 14th and 15th, 1828, Joseph and Martin prepared 116 pages of manuscript. Mr. Harris, anxious to display his accomplishments and soothe the feelings of his family, asked that he be allowed to take these pages to his home in Palmyra. Joseph requested permission of the Lord through the Urim and Thummim. The response was negative. Again, Martin begged Joseph to inquire, and the answer was still no. However, a third inquiry gained a conditional agreement. Joseph related.
After much solicitation, I again inquired of the Lord, and permission was granted him to have the writings on certain conditions, which were that he show them only to his brother, Preserved Harris, his own wife, his father and mother, and a Mrs. Cobb, a sister to his wife. In accordance with this last answer, I required of him that he should bind himself in a covenant to me in a most solemn manner, that he would not do otherwise than had been directed. He did so. He bound himself as I required of him, took the writings, and went his way.
Soon after Martin Harris left with the manuscript, Emma Smith gave birth to her first child, a baby boy, who died shortly after his arrival. The original gray slate headstone still stands in the northeast corner of the McCune Cemetery, bearing these simple lines. In memory of an infant son of Joseph and Emma Smith, June 15, 1828. Emma herself lay near death for several days. Joseph sat by her bedside night and day in what proved to be a successful effort to save her life. The critical condition of his wife left Joseph with little time to worry about the extended delay in Martin's return to Harmony with the 116 pages. However, after 3 weeks of intensive care, Emma was sufficiently well for Joseph to attend to other matters. Concerned over the safety of the manuscript, Joseph boarded a stage for Manchester. Much fatigued from his lengthy watch at the side of his wife, Joseph was in no condition to walk the long distance from where he'd finally departed the stage to the Smith home. Lucy Smith states that a stranger on the stage commented to her son,
"I have watched you since you first entered the stage, and I know that you have neither slept nor eaten since that time, and you shall not go on foot 20 miles alone this night. For if you must go, I will be your company. You will be in danger of falling asleep in the forest and of meeting with some awful disaster."
Joseph thanked the gentleman for his kindness, and leaving the stage, they proceeded together. When they reached our house, it was nearly daylight. The stranger said he was under the necessity of leading Joseph the last 4 miles by the arm, for nature was too much exhausted to support him any longer, and he would fall asleep as he was walking along every few minutes towards the last of this distance.
The unidentified stranger had breakfast with the Smiths, then hurried on his journey. When Joseph had sufficiently recovered, Martin Harris was sent for. About 12:30, he finally put in an appearance. He was seen walking toward the house with a slow and measured step, his eyes fixed on the ground. Instead of coming in at the gate, he climbed up on the fence and just sat there with his hat pulled down over his eyes. Finally, he entered the house and on invitation was placed at the dinner table. As he only poked at his food, Hiram inquired as to whether he was sick. Martin pressed his hands to his temples and then suddenly blurted out in deep anguish,
"Oh, I have lost my soul. I have lost my soul."
Joseph, his worst fears alerted, exclaimed,
"Martin, have you lost that manuscript? Have you broken your oath and brought down condemnation upon my head as well as your own?"
Martin Harris could only reply,
"Yes, it is gone, and I know not where."
When Joseph told Martin to go back to his home and search again, Martin explained,
"No, it is all in vain, for I have ripped open beds and pillows, and I know that it is not there."
Lucy Mack Smith expressed very strong sentiments as to just who she thought had engineered the theft of the manuscript.
There is no doubt but Mrs. Harris took it from the drawer, with the view of retaining it until another translation should be given, then to alter the original translation for the purpose of showing a discrepancy between them, and thus make the whole appear to be a deception.
Joseph returned to Harmony with a heavy heart. He'd already been deprived of the Urim and Thummim and the opportunity to translate because of his having wearied the Lord in asking for the privilege of letting Martin Harris take the writings. Now he shared the responsibility for a still greater error. The Urim and Thummim and the use of the plates were later restored to Joseph, and he learned by revelation that designing men were seeking to destroy the work by altering the text of his original translation. For this reason, he was to translate from other plates within the record, the small plates of Nephi, which covered the same period of time. Despite the fact that he now had the opportunity to translate again, Joseph had lost his scribe and was also under the necessity of farming his land in order to provide for his family. Although Emma and perhaps even her brother Reuben attempted to assist, the preparation of the Book of Mormon manuscript came to a virtual standstill from July 1828 to April 1829. In February 1829, Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Smith, concerned about not hearing from Joseph, came from Manchester to visit their son and his family. During this visit, the desires of Joseph Smith Sr. to know the will of the Lord concerning his actions in the expanding work brought forth a revelation now contained in the Doctrine and Covenants, Section 4. Today, the content of the revelation has been inscribed on a marker entitled Great Revelations, some 35 yards northeast of the restoration of the Aaronic Priesthood Monument at Old Harmony, presently Oakland Township. The Smith and Hale families were able to become better acquainted during the stay of Joseph's parents. Relative to this experience, Lucy Smith commented on her reaction toward the Isaac Hale family.
They were an intelligent and highly respectable family. They were pleasantly situated and lived in good style in the town of Harmony on the Susquehanna River, within a short distance of the place where Joseph resided. The time of our visit with them we passed very agreeably, and returned home relieved of a burden which was almost insupportable. And our present joy far overbalanced all our former grief.
In attempting to continue with the translation of the plates, Joseph found himself frustrated by the lack of a steady scribe. Emma apparently gave some assistance as a scribe on the project, but she had so much of her time taken up with the care of her house that she could write for him but a small portion of the time. The needed help was soon to arrive, however. On April 5, 1829, Joseph Smith received visitors in Harmony, his brother Samuel Harrison Smith, and a gentleman named Oliver Cowdery. According to Joseph, Mr. Cowdery informed him that,
having been teaching school in the neighborhood where my father resided, and my father being one of those who sent to the school, he went to board for a season at his house, and while there the family related to him the circumstances of my having received the plates, and accordingly he had come to make inquiries of me.
An invitation to assist with the translation was readily accepted by Oliver, who was convinced of its importance to the world. During the following months of April and May 1829, numerous revelations were received by these men as the Lord gave them close direction in the work of translation and in the restoration of his latter-day gospel. With the disappearance of the 116 pages of manuscript, because of Martin Harris's failure to keep them safely in his possession, Joseph encountered great difficulty in continuing the work. Following that loss, Martin was no longer acceptable to the Lord as scribe, and Joseph was restricted for a season from continuing with the translation. However, after an appropriate time, the gift was restored. Emma attempted to aid her husband by doing some writing for him. Although her efforts were meager, the brief experience as scribe gave Emma a heartfelt testimony of the work. She later expressed these strong feelings to her son, Joseph Smith III.
My belief is that the Book of Mormon is of divine authenticity. I have not the slightest doubt of it. I am satisfied that no man could have dictated the writing of the manuscripts unless he was inspired. For when acting as his scribe, your father would dictate to me hour after hour, and when returning after meals or after interruptions, he would at once begin where he had left off, without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him. This was a usual thing for him to do. It would have been improbable that a learned man could do this, and for one so unlearned as he was, it was simply impossible.
The timely arrival of Oliver Cowdery in Harmony, Susquehanna County, and his consent to act as a full-time scribe in the translation of the Book of Mormon relieved a great burden from Joseph's shoulders. What had been a desperate situation was now happily changed as Oliver began his assistance in transcribing the ancient scriptures on April 7, 1829. Oliver Cowdery has told us of the great personal satisfaction which he derived from this experience.
These were days never to be forgotten. To sit under the sound of a voice dictated by the inspiration of heaven awakened the utmost gratitude of this bosom. Day after day I continued uninterrupted to write from his mouth as he translated with the Urim and Thummim, or as the Nephites would have said, interpreters, the history or record called the Book of Mormon.
While in the process of translating, Joseph and Oliver had a most unusual experience with a heavenly messenger on May 15, 1829. A question about baptism for the remission of sins troubled them. Going into the nearby woods on the banks of the Susquehanna River, they prayed to the Lord for an answer. Joseph described the heavenly visitation which followed.
While we were thus employed, praying and calling upon the Lord, a messenger from heaven descended in a cloud of light, and having laid his hands upon us, he ordained us, saying,
Upon you, my fellow servants, in the name of Messiah, I confer the priesthood of Aaron, which holds the keys of the ministering of angels, and of the gospel of repentance, and of baptism by immersion for the remission of sins. And this shall never be taken again from the earth, until the sons of Levi do offer again an offering unto the Lord in righteousness.
He said this Aaronic priesthood had not the power of laying on hands for the gift of the Holy Ghost, but that this should be conferred on us hereafter. And he commanded us to go and be baptized, and gave us directions that I should baptize Oliver Cowdery, and afterwards that he should baptize me. Accordingly, we went and were baptized. I baptized him first, and afterwards he baptized me, after which I laid my hands upon his head and ordained him to the Aaronic priesthood. And afterwards he laid his hands on me, and ordained me to the same priesthood, for so we were commanded. The messenger who visited us on this occasion and conferred this priesthood upon us said that his name was John, the same that is called John the Baptist in the New Testament, and that he acted under the direction of Peter, James, and John, who held the keys of the priesthood of Melchizedek, which priesthood, he said, would in due time be conferred upon us.
Today, a beautiful monument of carnelian granite bearing a bronze panel with the figures of John the Baptist, Joseph Smith, and Oliver Cowdery marks the general location of this great event. This monument was paid for by donations from Aaronic priesthood members of the LDS Church. It was dedicated on June 18, 1960, before an audience of hundreds. The miraculous events surrounding the appearance of John the Baptist and the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood were still uppermost in their minds when Joseph and Oliver became the subjects of yet another glorious manifestation of the Lord's power. Peter, James, and John, ancient apostles of the Savior, came to the prophet and his scribe and conferred upon them the keys of the greater or Melchizedek priesthood. The dating which so positively marks the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood, May 15, 1829, is unfortunately lacking for the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood. As is the case with some other important dates in LDS church history, the exact moment of this significant event has been lost with the passage of time. We are aware only that sometime between May 15th and the end of June 1829, a conferral of the higher priesthood promised by John the Baptist during his appearance was accomplished. The prophet left only a brief statement concerning this significant happening when he referred to
the voice of Peter, James, and John in the wilderness between Harmony, Susquehanna County, and Colesville, Broome County, on the Susquehanna River, declaring themselves as possessing the keys of the kingdom and the dispensation of the fullness of times.
While Joseph and Oliver continued the work of translation, they were threatened
with being mobbed from time to time, and this too by professors of religion.
Only the influence of Isaac Hale had thus far saved them from real violence. However, with the increased mob activity, the safety of the plates as well as their own personal security became questionable. Oliver was instructed by Joseph to write to his friend David Whitmer in Fayette, Seneca County, New York, and ask him if he could not come down and take them to his own home, out of the dangerous situation they were experiencing in Harmony. David asked his father if it was all right to bring his friends to the farm, and was told by Peter Whitmer Sr. that they would be welcome. David was in the midst of a heavy farming schedule and wasn't sure just how quickly he could get away. He explained the miraculous events which followed.
I did not know what to do. I was pressed with my work. I had some 20 acres to plow, and so I concluded I would finish plowing and then go. I got up one morning to go to work as usual, and on going to the field, found between 5 and 7 acres of my ground had been plowed during the night. I don't know who did it, but it was done just as I would have done it myself, and the plow was left standing in the furrow. This enabled me to start sooner.
Upon his arrival at Harmony, David was surprised to see Joseph and Oliver, who came out to meet him some distance from the house. Oliver explained that
Joseph had informed him when I started from home, where I had stopped the first night, how I read the sign at the tavern, where I stopped the next night, etc., and that I would be there that day before dinner, and this was why they had come out to meet me.
David confirmed Joseph's descriptions of his activities while on their return trip to Fayette. Emma did not accompany Joseph immediately, but remained behind with her folks for a short season. Joseph, afraid of an encounter with enemies on the road, sent the plates to Fayette in the keeping of an angel. While en route to Seneca County, David described this strange and marvelous happening.
When I was returning to Fayette with Joseph and Oliver, all riding in the wagon, Oliver and I on an old-fashioned wooden spring seat, and Joseph behind us, while traveling along in a clear, open space, a very pleasant, nice-looking old man suddenly appeared by the side of our wagon and saluted us with, "Good morning, it is very warm," at the same time wiping his face or forehead with his hand. We returned the salutation, and by a sign from Joseph, I invited him to ride if he was going our way. But he said very pleasantly, "No, I'm going to Cumorah." This name was something new to me. I did not know what Cumorah meant. We all gazed at him and at each other, and as I looked around inquiringly of Joseph, the old man instantly disappeared, so that I did not see him again. I also remember that he had on his back a sort of knapsack with something in, shaped like a book. It was the messenger who had the plates, who had taken them from Joseph just prior to our starting from Harmony.
Joseph said that they arrived in Fayette in the first part of June 1829. The work of translation was resumed in an upstairs room of the Peter Whitmer Sr. log cabin. Although Oliver Cowdery continued to act as the principal scribe to Joseph, others also gave their assistance. David declared,
Emma, Joseph's wife, came to my father's house a short time after Joseph and Oliver came, and she wrote a little of the translation. My brother, Christian, wrote some, but Oliver wrote the greater portion of it.
He further informed us that
it was a laborious work, for the weather was very warm. and the days were long. And they, Joseph and Oliver, worked from morning till night. But they were both young and strong and were soon able to complete the work.
When the work of translation was nearly complete, Joseph sent a messenger to his parents in Manchester requesting that they come immediately to the Whitmer residence. Martin Harris accompanied them to Fayette. At that time, the Lord gave the prophet a revelation indicating that Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris were to serve as witnesses to the sacred nature of the translation.
Behold, I say unto you, that you must rely upon my word, which if you do with full purpose of heart, you shall have a view of the plates, and also of the breastplate, the sword of Laban, the Urim and Thummim, which were given to the brother of Jared upon the mount when he talked with the Lord face to face, and the miraculous directors which were given to Lehi while in the wilderness on the borders of the Red Sea. And after that you have obtained faith, and have seen them with your eyes, you shall testify of them by the power of God.
Shortly thereafter, while David Whitmer was in the process of plowing a field, he was invited by Joseph to accompany him and the others into some woods that stood near the Whitmer home. As they entered the trees, they all knelt down, and Joseph offered prayer. Obtaining no manifestation of divine favor in their first attempt, they tried again. Still, there was no answer.
Upon this, our second failure, Martin Harris proposed that he would withdraw himself from us, believing, as he expressed himself, that his presence was the cause of our not obtaining what we wished for.
The prophet explained.
He accordingly withdrew from us, and we knelt down again, and had not been many minutes engaged in prayer, when presently we beheld a light above us in the air.
David recalled the circumstances.
All at once, a light came down from above us and encircled us for quite a little distance around. And the angel stood before us. He was dressed in white, and spoke and called me by name and said, Blessed is he that keepeth his commandments. This is all that I heard the angel say. A table was set before us, and on it the records were placed. The records of the Nephites, from which the Book of Mormon was translated. The breastplates, the ball of directors, the sword of Laban, and other plates. While we were viewing them, the voice of God spoke out of heaven, saying that the book was true and the translation correct.
After the angel had given his message to the three, Joseph went in search of Martin Harris, and through their combined prayers, a similar experience was repeated for the benefit of Martin. Lucy Mack Smith informs us that a few days later, quite a company gathered at their home in Manchester. The male members retired to a place outside the house where the Smith family often went for their private prayers. Among the group were the prophet, Christian Whitmer, Jacob Whitmer, Peter Whitmer Jr., John Whitmer, Hiram Page, Joseph Smith Sr., Hiram Smith, and Samuel H. Smith.
They went to this place because it had been revealed to Joseph that the plates would be carried thither by one of the ancient Nephites. Here it was that those 8 witnesses, whose names are recorded in the Book of Mormon, looked upon them and handled them.
The 8 witnesses said they saw and handled with their hands the plates as displayed by Joseph Smith. But they did not claim to see an angel, hear the voice, nor were there present the ancient artifacts mentioned by David Whitmer in the vision which the 3 witnesses had experienced in Fayette. It is an important factor that both groups of witnesses with determination maintained their testimonies of these events throughout their lives.